Jasmine O'Connor, OBE, has been CEO of Anti-Slavery International since 2018. She's committed to building a broad anti-slavery movement, making sure solutions are sustainable and informed by survivors and people at risk of slavery. Over a 30-year career, Jasmine has led a wide range of international human rights campaigns that combine practical grassroots programs with policy change initiatives. She has worked across Africa, Asia, and Europe, and has an MA in international diplomacy. She was awarded an OBE for her services to international human rights and development. And just for myself, I was privileged to be seconded for 2 years to Anti-Slavery International as part of my research fellowship. And it was a real honor to work there and to get to know Jasmine and the others. So Jasmine will talk about the climate change focus in particular that she's been working on. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. And hello to everyone. I know it's very weird on Zoom and you can't see people's faces and you can't connect, but it would be lovely to just get a sense of who's in the Zoom room, as it were. Maybe people could just drop a little message into the chat to say hi, maybe where you're from, whether you're based in the UK, whether you're an academic, etc., etc. So just sort of make yourselves known by just dropping a little line in the chat, so we can just start to see who's in the room and build a sense of this community that, in a sense, is gathering to look at this subject together. So thanks for inviting me to address the conference today, Chris. And likewise, you know, I'd echo the comments. It looks like an amazing array of individuals and organisations that are speaking. So I'm very excited to not just be addressing the conference, but also to be able to join for some of the day to develop my own learning and understanding on these issues. It's great to see how interest and knowledge in this work is building across academia, civil society, in the global north and south, the trade union movement, and in global and regional institutions. And it's encouraging because we need to understand more about the links between climate change and modern slavery, and we need to work together to find solutions and take action. I'm really pleased that today's agenda covers a range of issues, from the impact of climate change on migration and vulnerability to modern slavery, the use of forced labour in supply chains and in environmentally degrading businesses, as well as the consideration of the impact of conflict and disaster and intersecting vulnerabilities with climate change. So that's exciting. And, you know, the reason we as an organisation that's campaigning against slavery and has been doing so for 182 years, the reason we're excited is that we can see this building into bold calls for action, that the evidence builds to kind of enable us to have the power and the messages that we need to call for the action that is required. And so as a part of this conference, you know, we will be inviting participants and speakers to add their names to an outcome statement that we will use to sort of advocate and engage different policy audiences around COP26. We'll drop that in the messages in a short moment, and we'd love you to have a look at that. We'd love you to read that through, whether you feel you can sign on as an individual or whether you can sign on as an organisation. We do hope that you'd share and use that statement to help raise awareness around some of the demands that people in modern slavery or at risk of modern slavery are asking for in the context of the climate talks in Glasgow in November. So maybe a little bit about anti-slavery. We're 181 years old. We're the oldest human rights organisation in the world. We are working for freedom for everyone, everywhere, always, in the sense that we don't want quick fix solutions. We want sustainable solutions. There are over 40 million people around the world in slavery today. That's around about 1 in every 200 people. So look around this Zoom room, you know, the chances are a little under 200, but the chances are that somebody in this Zoom room may have lived through modern slavery. People end up trapped in modern slavery because they're vulnerable to being tricked, trapped and exploited, often as a result of poverty and exclusion. And the political and economic and social systems that disadvantage groups in society and the laws that fail to protect are all the ways in which the pernicious modern slavery forms become embedded and become systemic. Whether you're talking about bonded labour in the brick kilns and fields of South Asia, children forced to beg on the streets of West Africa, migrant workers in debt bondage, or whole families born into slavery in West Africa, every type of slavery involves some form of entrapment. Every type of slavery involves some form of tricking and coercion. And at anti-slavery, we seek to address the systems, the root causes, the things that put people at risk of slavery at the first place. And so our focus is on changing policy, law, and the kind of normative practices that drive slavery, to make sure that we create systems of protection and prevention. And climate change, we've come to this agenda with a real commitment, because our understanding is climate change has the potential to drive slavery on an unimaginable scale. Our research recently with IIED identified how climate change is acting as a domino effect, multiplying existing risks, driving migration, and increasing vulnerability to slavery. The climate crisis is leading to widespread unemployment. Major sections of the global population are at greater risk of exploitation in forced labour and other forms of slavery. And of course, this whole pressure of climate change and its impacts make it hard for states to respond. So we have to look now, we have to work out how to respond in what is our best situation that we're ever going to be in. We all recognise that this is, we've really, it's as good as it gets right now. Limiting global warming to 1.5% rather than 2% could reduce the number of people exposed to climate-related risks and susceptible to poverty by up to around about several hundred million by 2050. And keeping the world to 1.5 average global warming means reducing greenhouse gas emissions 45% below their 2010 levels by 2030 and reaching net zero emissions by 2050. These transitions need to be fair and just. That means that the transitions need to respect the vulnerable and respect the fundamental rights of all those involved. So we need bold action in several areas. I'll touch upon a couple briefly just to give us some food for thought before we go into the panel discussions and get some more depth and more meat on the bones. Firstly, in the area of climate, finance and planning for adaptation, resilience, loss and damage. The impact of climate change disrupts entire communities, destroying food, water and livelihood systems and increasing vulnerability to exploitation and modern slavery. We need plans to make sure that people are not put at risk of slavery, but that resilient communities are built with the support and resources needed to adapt to climate change. National adaptation plans must build resilience for the most vulnerable and prevent slavery. In terms of our calls for COP26, we're asking for governments to make sure that they are aware of the contexts in their own countries and are looking at the dynamics of slavery and understanding that as they're building those adaptation and resilience plans. But there are limits to how much countries can adapt to the inevitable impacts of climate change. The international climate negotiations incorporate a loss and damage pillar supported by the Warsaw International Mechanism. This is designed to help countries, especially the most vulnerable, to deal with the harm caused by climate change. Now, adequate finances and resources and capacity to address loss and damage is urgently required. The Santiago network that was established to effectively catalyse technical assistance for developing countries to avert, minimise and address loss and damage needs to be prioritised at COP26. So we're adding our voice to the many climate change activists who are calling for the correct level of finance and capacity building to address loss and damage, and to make sure that slavery affected populations and populations that are at risk of slavery are included within the understanding of what that needs to look like. And the final area I'll touch upon, and it is a theme that I think is already emerging from this conference, and that is of a just transition. Climate change and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic have profound implications for human rights. Climate action and building back from the COVID-19 pandemic needs to happen fast, but it also needs to be participatory and fair. We need a just transition to net zero, and we need to focus on the most vulnerable. Policymakers have got to work with workers, with trade unions, with civil society, and survivors of slavery. And right now, quite frankly, there aren't enough seats at the table taken up by those that are most affected. We need to see that shift, and we need to make sure that the voices of those who are affected by slavery have a seat at the table. And certainly from the perspective of anti-slavery, we would call for those policy engagements to involve the voices of individuals who have either experienced modern slavery or who indeed are at the front lines. We really welcome the recent creation of the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the context of climate change. And we note that the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, the Paris Climate Agreement and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda provide a framework for achieving sustainable, more equal and resilient societies. This holistic vision needs to ensure a rights-based approach with international labour standards guaranteed for all and decent work to achieve sustainable development. And at the heart of this transition, we need decent green jobs. We need to make sure that the changes that are coming focus on building economies in a way in which both addresses slavery and climate change. This requires really bold action and imagination from our governments. And in order to get that action and to get that imagination, it's up to us to keep up the pressure. So every academic paper, every piece of research, every petition, every letter to every MP is an important part of this movement to galvanise the kind of pressure that we need to see to create the solutions and to make sure that our governments take action. So I'll end my short sort of opening remarks just by reminding you, please do look at the Google Doc. We'll pop it up in a second. Please do have a look at it. And please do consider signing, and please do promote to your networks. I'm delighted to be able to support this event, and we really look forward to listening to the contributions of all the expert panelists and hearing the discussion and debate on these increasingly important priorities.